Hello again. In my previous video I showed you how to create a Kubernetes cluster using kubeadm command from scratch on your node, and in this video I will speak about pod in Kubernetes. First, let's go and see what does the pod mean. Here we have a pod of whale. Here we have a pod, and in this pod we have some whale. Also, this is a pod, and in this pod we have some p. Okay, so pod is the smallest component in Kubernetes cluster, and it contains some container. It can have multiple container. We can run multiple container in our pod. But let's see how to manage container in pod and how to create a pod. In our environment we will have different kind of container. Some of them is our front end container. As you can see here, we have different kind of container. Some of them is our front-end container, another one is our back-end container, and another one is our database container. Let me correct it. So we have different kind of container in our environment, and we can have a pod, which this pod can contain different kind of container. So can we put this container in one pod? Can you put this p and whale in the same pod? No, it is not possible, because whale is larger than p and they are different. So never put your front end, back end, and database container in the same pod. Instead, we will have a pod for our front-end container, another pod for back-end container, and another one for databases. And this pod contain some container. Also, it can contain some container. Also, our databases can contain some container. Let's go and see when do we have different container in one pod. If you have some container and they are using a shared volume. For example, our Nginx pod using a volume, and we have a Debian app which is creating some resources and put in this volume. We can put these two containers in the same pod. Or in another project, we have a message broker, a message queue, and we have one container which is our producer, another container is our consumer. We can put these container in the same pod. Or we have some pod, they have inter-container network communication. We put this container in the same pod. As you know, container created using namespace and C group, and we can use this logical to put pod or container in a pod. So let's go and see how to create a pod in our environment. As you can see, as you know, I created an alias for kubectl command, so I can use k instead of kubectl. This is the cluster I ran in my previous video, and I have some nodes here. As you can see, I have 3 nodes running in my container. Let's go and see how to create a pod in our environment. As you can see, I don't have any pod in my environment. To create a pod, I can use this command, kubectl run pod name, and using this image inside my container, I will use nginx to create this pod. As you can see, this pod created and it is running. Also, we can see this have an IP address, and that's it. But to create a pod, we can use a manifest file. Let's go and see what is the manifest file. kubectl get all. Okay, you know, we have an API server running in our cluster. Using this API server, we can create some component in our Kubernetes cluster, and as you can see here, we have a pod which is API version 1. Okay, let's create a manifest file to create a pod in our environment. Vim pod nginx 1.yaml. Okay, at first I should mention which API version I am using. As you can see here, API version for pod is version 1. API version is version 1. And after that, let's see what should we put after the API version. Kube explain pod. As you can see here, when our pod contain API version, kind, metadata, spec, and status. So after mentioning API version, I will use kind. Kind is a string which is pod. After mentioning pod, so our kind is pod, and after kind we have metadata. Here we should mention pod name. This is the pod name, and after pod name we have a spec which contain container information. But let's see what do we have in our metadata section. Pod. In our metadata section, we have namespace, we have name, also we have label. So here I want to label this pod. Labels color is red. This is a label. I can use any labels for my pods. And after that, let's go back to the pod. For our pod, we have another section which is a spec, and in spec we have volume, we have different kind of configuration here, but I'm interested in container. As you can see, I can put some containers into my pod, and it is a list of containers. We can put some containers in this section. I have containers here. Name of container is container name. Also, my container have a image. Use Nginx to create this pod. So this is a manifest file. Let's go and create a pod using manifest. Let's see what pod do we have here. We have one pod in our environment. kubectl create using this manifest. So create a pod using this manifest file. Let's see, we have a error here. It said pod name already exists. We have a pod running with this name. Let's change the name, manifest file. Let's go and create it again. We can see our pod created using manifest file, and we have pod in our environment. And if I SSH to my master node, kubectl get pod-o void, you can see this is my pod's IP address, and if I curl, my pod is running perfectly. It is the pod in Kubernetes. In next video, I will speak about replica set in Kubernetes, replication controller. We don't use replication controller in our environment. I will speak about replica set in Kubernetes cluster.